"Please, don't touch me," the bleeding native woman begged. Widower Cowboy froze at what he saw next. Samuel Hayes rode slowly along the narrow trail that wound through the hills outside Red Rock. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape. Samuel had been riding this trail for years, but the quiet of that evening felt different, almost heavy. The wind whispered through the dry grass and the branches of twisted oaks, carrying with it the faint smell of smoke and dust. Samuel adjusted the worn leather saddle beneath him and scanned the path ahead. He was a widower now, having lost his beloved wife several years ago. Since then, he had lived mostly alone, finding comfort in the routine of his life on the edge of the frontier. His days were simple, tending to his small herd, repairing fences, and riding the trails to gather supplies or check on distant neighbors. But this evening, he felt a strange tension in the air, as if the land itself was warning him that something was about to happen. The trail dipped into a shallow ravine, and Samuel slowed his horse, careful to avoid loose rocks. That's when he saw her. At first he thought she was just a shadow, a trick of the fading light. But as he rode closer he realized it was a young woman, barely standing, her clothes torn and stained. She moved awkwardly, staggering through the brush as if every step hurt. Samuel's heart tightened in his chest. He had seen injuries before, animal attacks, accidents, but there was something in the way she moved that made him pause. Desperation radiated from her like heat from a fire. "Please, don't touch me," she whispered, her voice trembling so much that Samuel had to strain to hear her. Samuel froze mid-step. The words were so simple, yet they carried a weight that made him halt in his tracks. His mind raced, trying to understand what had happened. Was she hurt badly? Had someone harmed her? Or was she afraid of him, a stranger on a lonely trail? He kept his horse at a careful distance and raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you," Samuel said slowly, keeping his voice calm and soft. "I just want to help." The woman's eyes were wide with fear, darting around as if the trees themselves might hide more danger. Samuel noticed the fresh cuts on her arms and the smear of blood on her cheek. Her hands shook, and she clutched her side, trying to hold herself together. She looked barely older than 20, with dark hair matted with dirt and sweat. Samuel's heart ached at the sight. He had never seen such raw fear, and it stirred something deep inside him. A need to protect, to do what was right, no matter the danger. Samuel dismounted slowly, making sure to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. He left his horse tied to a nearby tree, his eyes never leaving the young woman. "Can you tell me what happened?" he asked gently. The woman shook her head, biting her lip to stop herself from crying. I can't," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, carried away by the wind. Samuel could see the tension in her body, the way she was bracing herself as if she expected the next blow to come from anywhere. He took a cautious step closer, careful not to invade her space, his eyes scanning the surrounding woods for any sign of threat. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, and the shadows grew longer, making the forest seem darker and more ominous. Samuel felt a mix of fear and determination. He knew that staying too far away might frighten her even more, but moving too close could be dangerous if she reacted out of panic. "I just want to help you," he repeated softly. "No one's going to hurt you while I'm here." There was a hesitation in her eyes, a conflict between fear and hope. Samuel could see the struggle on her face, the internal battle of whether to trust this stranger. He understood. After all, he himself had been betrayed before. By nature, by people, by life, he had learned that trust was earned, not given freely. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she took a small step toward him. Her movements were shaky, and Samuel instinctively extended his hand, careful not to make sudden gestures. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now. Just take my hand if you can." She hesitated again, then slowly reached out, trembling as their hands met. Samuel felt a jolt of responsibility and concern. He could see every cut and bruise now, the raw pain that ran deeper than any surface wound. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a clean cloth, folding it carefully before offering it to her. "We need to stop the bleeding," he said, his voice steady. "It won't take long. Just let me help." The woman's lips quivered, but she allowed him to place the cloth over her wounds. Samuel worked carefully, cleaning and wrapping the cuts, trying to make the process as gentle as possible. Every so often she flinched, but he reassured her, speaking softly, telling her she was brave. He had learned in his life that words could heal in ways that medicine sometimes could not. As he worked, Samuel's mind raced. Who could have done this to her? The frontier was dangerous, yes, but it was usually predictable. Wolves, storms, accidents. But this felt different. The fear in her eyes told him she had encountered humans, not animals, and not just any humans. People capable of cruelty. He cursed under his breath, his jaw tightening. Whoever had done this would have to be stopped, but first, he had to make sure she was safe. Once he finished tending to her immediate injuries, he stepped back slightly, giving her space but remaining close enough to act if necessary. "We need to get you somewhere safe," he said. "Can you ride? We'll take it slow." The woman nodded hesitantly, still trembling. Samuel helped her onto the horse, keeping his movements slow and careful. As they rode toward the safety of the trail leading back to town, Samuel's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, questions, fears, and plans. He couldn't ignore what had happened, but he also couldn't risk further harm to the woman. He had to be cautious, clever, and fast. The ride was tense and quiet. The only sounds were the horse's hooves crunching against the dirt trail and the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Samuel stole glances at the young woman, whose gaze was fixed on the horizon. There was a sadness in her eyes, but also a flicker of trust that had begun to take root. Samuel felt a strange mix of sorrow and hope. He didn't know her story yet, but he knew it would change his life. And perhaps in helping her, he could heal a part of himself he hadn't realized was still wounded. By the time they reached a small clearing, the sky had turned a deep shade of purple, and the first stars began to appear. Samuel guided the horse gently, finding a safe spot among the trees. He dismounted, offering the woman a hand again to steady herself. She took it this time without hesitation. Samuel smiled faintly, a small gesture, but one that carried reassurance and warmth. They had both survived the first encounter, but Samuel knew the real journey, the one of understanding, protection, and perhaps justice, was only just beginning. The trail ahead was uncertain, dangerous, and full of questions, but Samuel Hayes was ready. And so, in the quiet twilight, amidst the shadows and whispers of the wind, the cowboy and the bleeding native woman paused, each aware that their lives had just become intertwined in a way neither of them could have predicted. The young woman shivered as Samuel guided the horse along the dusty trail. Her breathing was uneven, and her hands clutched at her lap as if holding herself together could somehow keep the world from collapsing. Samuel kept glancing at her, his rugged face marked with worry lines. He had dealt with injuries before, seen animals hurt and travelers lost, but the fear in her eyes was unlike anything he had witnessed. It was raw, deep, and heavy. It weighed on him, pressing against his own memories of loss and loneliness. "Can you tell me what happened?" Samuel asked gently. His voice was soft, like the wind through the trees, steady and calm. The woman shook her head, tears glimmering in the corner of her eyes. I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking. She looked down at her lap, her dark hair falling over her face, hiding the bruises and scratches. Samuel nodded, understanding that she needed time. He had learned long ago that trust wasn't given, it was earned, and after what she had been through, it would take patience. For a few moments they rode in silence, the horse's hooves striking the dry ground in a slow rhythm. The only sounds were the whisper of the wind and the occasional distant call of a bird. Samuel's mind was racing. He could see the fresh wounds on her arms, the blood that had already begun to dry, and the faint dirt smudges that marked her clothes. Whatever had happened to her was recent, and it was clear that she had been in danger. The thought of it made his chest tighten with anger and fear. He remembered the first time he had felt helpless in his own life, the time after his wife had passed. He had ridden these same trails, feeling the emptiness of the world pressing down on him, wishing he could change the past. Now seeing this woman, he felt that old helplessness returning, but mixed with something else, determination. He would not fail her the way life had failed him before. As they rode, the woman began to speak in small, broken sentences. They came to the village," she whispered, barely audible. "Men with horses. They wanted money and things from us." Her voice trembled, and Samuel could see her hands shaking even more. He urged the horse to slow, giving her time to catch her breath and gather her courage. "They hurt people," she continued, her words halting. They burned the huts, and they chased those who tried to run. I hid, I ran, but..." She trailed off, and her eyes filled with tears. Samuel reached out, gently placing a hand near hers. Not touching, just close enough to show he was present. "You're safe now," he said quietly. "No one can hurt you while I'm here. Just tell me what I need to know to help." She took a shaky breath, then looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and gratitude. They left some of us behind. They thought we were weak. I managed to escape, but..." Her voice broke, and Samuel could see the weight of her experience pressing down on her young shoulders. Samuel's mind raced as he listened. He could picture the scene she was describing. A small village, homes made of wood and cloth, smoke curling into the sky, people fleeing in fear. His heart clenched at the thought of violence in such a fragile place, a place full of families, children, and elders who had done no harm to anyone. The cruelty of those men filled him with anger, but he knew that showing his rage now would not help the woman. He needed to stay calm, focused, and careful. "Do you remember where they went?" he asked, keeping his voice steady. She nodded slowly, pointing toward the distant hills where the last light of the sun glimmered. "They rode that way," she said. I don't know if anyone can stop them." Her voice was small, almost a whisper, and Samuel could feel the fear she carried. He looked toward the direction she had indicated. The hills were uneven, scattered with trees and rocks, perfect for hiding. It would be difficult to track anyone, but Samuel had spent years riding these trails. He knew the land better than most, and he trusted his instincts. As the horse moved forward, Samuel kept glancing around. Every shadow, every rustle of leaves made him alert. He couldn't let himself be caught off guard. He remembered the stories he had heard from neighbors about outlaws and thieves who roamed the frontier, preying on small villages. But this was personal. He could feel it deep in his bones. He had to act. Not just for the woman, but for the people she had left behind. The ones who might still be in danger. The woman shifted slightly on the horse, wincing as her wounds rubbed against the saddle. Samuel adjusted the cloth he had used to bandage her, making sure it stayed in place and did not cause further pain. "We're almost to a safe place," he said, though the words sounded more like a promise to himself than to her. "Just a little farther, and we can rest." She nodded, leaning slightly against him, trusting him enough to let her weight be supported. It was a small act, but to Samuel, it meant the world. It was the first sign that she was beginning to trust him, that she believed he would not let harm come to her. The trail led them to a small clearing near a stream. The water glistened under the fading light, reflecting the colors of the sunset. Samuel dismounted carefully, helping the woman to her feet. She was weak, but she did not fall, standing unsteadily by the horse. He led her to a safe spot among the trees, away from the main path, and sat her down on a blanket he carried. "Drink some water," he said, offering a canteen. She took small sips, her hands trembling as she held the container. Samuel watched her closely, noting every detail, the way she flinched at sudden sounds, the way her eyes scanned the surrounding woods, always alert. He knew that her fear would not disappear immediately. It would take time, patience, and care. After a few moments, she spoke again, her voice quieter but steadier. I don't know why they did it," she said. They didn't need to hurt us. We had nothing of value, only what we grew and made ourselves." Samuel nodded, understanding. He had seen greed and cruelty before, but he knew that sometimes the worst actions came from fear or the desire for power. "Some people do terrible things," he said softly, "but that doesn't mean the world is only cruel. You've survived, and that shows courage. We'll make sure the others are safe too." The woman allowed a small, weary smile to touch her face. It was fleeting, but it gave Samuel hope. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult. There would be challenges, dangers, and difficult decisions, but for now he focused on the immediate need, keeping her safe, calming her fear, and preparing for what might come next. As night fell, the forest around them grew darker. The wind carried the sounds of nocturnal animals, the rustle of leaves, and the distant call of an owl. Samuel kept watch, his eyes scanning every shadow, ready to act if danger appeared. He thought about the village she had fled, the people who were still at risk, and the men who had caused this suffering. He vowed silently that he would not let them go unchallenged. The woman leaned back slightly against the tree, her breathing slower now, though still uneven. She had begun to relax just a little, trusting Samuel enough to let her guard down. He studied her face, noting the mixture of fear, relief, and cautious hope. She was fragile, yet strong in a way that came from surviving something terrible. Samuel felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond simple compassion. He had to protect her not just for her sake, but because doing so reminded him of the better parts of life, the parts worth fighting for. Hours passed, the darkness deepening. The stars began to dot the sky, twinkling faintly through the branches. Samuel kept his eyes on the trail, listening, alert, ready for anything. I would be so happy he knew that the story she had shared was only part of the truth. The full horror of what had happened to her and to her village was still out there, waiting to be uncovered. Yet, despite the fear and uncertainty, there was a quiet determination in both of them. She had survived the first encounter, and Samuel, the widower cowboy, had found a renewed sense of purpose in protecting her. Together, in the stillness of the night, they waited, ready to face whatever would come next. The first light of dawn began to filter through the trees, casting a soft golden glow on the clearing. Samuel sat beside the young woman, watching her breathe in the morning air, her small chest rising and falling steadily. The night had been long and tense, with every sound of the forest echoing like a warning. But now, in the quiet morning, there was a brief sense of calm. Samuel hoped this pause might allow her to regain some strength before they faced the dangers ahead. She had not spoken much since the night fell. The shock of what had happened, combined with exhaustion and pain, had left her quiet. Samuel watched her closely, noting the deep lines of worry on her young face. He understood her fear. It was not just the immediate danger she had escaped, but the thought of those who were still at risk. Her people, her home, the others in the village. He could feel her worry radiating from her, and it pulled at him as well. "I need to know," Samuel said gently, breaking the silence. "If we are going to make sure the others are safe, I have to know what we are facing. Can you tell me what you remember about the men who did this?" The woman took a slow, trembling breath. They were rough," she said softly. "Men on horses, with angry faces. They didn't talk much, only shouted orders. They took what they wanted and hurt anyone who tried to stop them. I don't know how many there were, maybe 6, maybe more. They moved fast, like they knew the land." The thought of those men riding so close to her village, causing pain and destruction, filled him with anger. He had seen greed and cruelty before, but hearing it described so plainly, so close, made it real. He felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. He had the skill, the knowledge of the land, and the will to act. But there was a question he could not answer easily. Should he pursue the men immediately, or focus entirely on getting the woman to safety first? He glanced at her, noticing the bruises on her face and the fresh bandages on her arms. She looked fragile, her body still weak from running and hiding, yet her eyes carried a quiet resilience. Samuel realized that acting too hastily could put her in more danger. But doing nothing could allow the men to harm others. The dilemma weighed heavily on him. He had always lived by a personal code: protect the innocent whenever possible, but not recklessly. Now, the stakes felt higher than ever. I can help you," he said finally, choosing his words carefully. "But we have to be careful. We can't act without a plan. First, we need to make sure you are safe and strong enough to travel. Then we can decide how to handle the men who did this." The woman nodded slowly, her eyes meeting his. There was a flicker of trust there, tiny but noticeable, and it gave Samuel hope. He realized that she needed not only physical protection, but reassurance that someone cared, someone would not let her face danger alone. He reached into his bag and pulled out some food he had packed for his own journey, a few pieces of dried meat, a small loaf of bread, and some water. He offered it to her. "Eat something," he said gently. "It will give you strength." At first she hesitated, staring at the food as if unsure whether she deserved it or could trust it. Then slowly she took a small piece of bread and nibbled. Samuel watched her carefully, noting every reaction. He knew that feeding her was more than just physical care. It was a way to show her that someone was looking out for her, someone she could rely on. After a few minutes, Samuel packed up his supplies and helped her onto the horse again. The trail ahead was long and uncertain, winding through dense forest and open plains. Samuel knew that they would need to move carefully to avoid encountering the men again. He kept his senses sharp, listening for the sounds of distant hooves, the rustle of leaves, anything that might signal danger. As they rode, Samuel's thoughts returned to the moral choice he faced. He had spent years alone thinking about justice and fairness, about right and wrong. But now, faced with a real situation, the abstract ideas became urgent, tangible. He could not ignore the violence that had been done, yet he could not risk the woman's life by acting too quickly. Every instinct he had as a tracker, as a protector, as a man who had known loss, told him to be cautious. But his heart urged him to act, to confront the wrong, and stop it from happening to anyone else. The woman seemed to sense his thoughts, looking up at him with a quiet curiosity. Do you think they will come back?" she asked softly. Samuel shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we will be ready if they do. Right now, our priority is getting you somewhere safe. After that, we will decide the best way to help the others." They rode in silence for a while, the rhythm of the horse's hooves and the quiet of the morning creating a temporary sense of peace. Samuel allowed himself a moment to reflect on the life he had led. He had faced many challenges, but this was different. This was not just survival. It was a test of courage, wisdom, and compassion. He realized that protecting the woman was not only about keeping her safe from harm, but also about standing up against cruelty, even when it was dangerous. As they reached a small ridge, Samuel stopped the horse to catch his breath and survey the surrounding area. From this vantage point, he could see the distant hills and the faint trail where the men might have gone. He studied the land carefully, noticing the paths, the streams, and the patches of trees where someone could hide. He began to form a plan in his mind, thinking about how he could track the men if necessary, how he could protect the woman, and how he could avoid putting either of them in more danger. The woman watched him silently, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and admiration. She had seen him act carefully, speak kindly, and handle her injuries with care. She began to feel a sense of hope, a belief that maybe someone would stand up for her and her village. For the first time since the attack, she felt a small spark of safety, a fragile but powerful feeling. Samuel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision he faced. He knew that choosing the right path would require courage, patience, and careful thinking. He could not let anger dictate his actions. He had to act with wisdom, planning each step carefully to ensure that no one else would be harmed, and yet the thought of leaving the men free to hurt others filled him with urgency. He could feel the fire of justice building inside him, a determination to do what was right, even if it was difficult. After a moment, he spoke to the woman again, his voice calm but firm. "We will get you back to your village, or to a safe place nearby. Then we will decide together how to help the others. You are not alone in this." She nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek, but this time it was not only fear, it was relief. She trusted him enough to believe that he would not abandon her, that he would face whatever challenges lay ahead with courage and care. As they continued down the trail, Samuel kept a careful watch. Every shadow, every rustle, every movement in the trees could be a sign of danger. His senses were heightened, his mind alert, but his heart remained steady. He knew that protecting the young woman required more than physical skill. It required patience, planning, and the willingness to act with both courage and wisdom. Hours passed, the sun climbing higher in the sky. Samuel guided the horse through the rough terrain, helping the woman over rocks and roots, ensuring that her wounds did not worsen. He spoke to her occasionally, telling small stories, asking her questions about her life before the attack, listening carefully to her responses. Slowly he began to see a change. She was becoming more confident, more willing to move forward, and more willing to trust him. By mid-afternoon, they reached a small, sheltered area near a stream, where Samuel decided to rest. He helped the woman dismount, allowing her to sit by the water while he tended to her wounds again, making sure the bandages were secure. The sunlight reflected off the water, creating a serene, peaceful moment that seemed almost impossible after the fear and pain of the previous day. Samuel felt a quiet satisfaction, a sense of accomplishment, in helping her survive the first day after the attack, but he knew that the real challenge was still ahead. The men who had caused this pain were still out there, and others could be at risk. He had to make a careful plan, one that would protect the woman, stop the men, and ensure that justice was done without putting anyone else in harm's way. As the day began to fade, Samuel helped her back onto the horse. They continued their journey slowly, carefully, each step bringing them closer to safety and the decisions that lay ahead. The young woman rode silently, her eyes thoughtful, while Samuel's mind raced with plans and possibilities. He knew that the coming hours and days would test both of them in ways they could not yet imagine. And yet, despite the fear, despite the uncertainty, Samuel felt a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, he felt that his life had meaning beyond his own survival. He had found someone to protect, someone to care for, and a cause worth standing up for. And in that, he found the courage to face whatever dangers lay ahead, determined to do what was right, no matter the cost. The sun was just beginning to rise when Samuel adjusted the blanket around the young woman and urged the horse forward. The trail ahead was rough, winding through dense trees and uneven ground. Samuel's eyes scanned every shadow, every branch that moved in the wind, alert for any sign of danger. The memory of the men she had fled from lingered in his mind. He knew they were skilled horsemen, experienced in taking what they wanted and leaving fear in their wake. But he also knew the land better than anyone, and he trusted his instincts. "Are you ready?" he asked quietly. The woman nodded, gripping the saddle tightly. Her voice was still soft from exhaustion, but there was a flicker of determination in her eyes. Samuel smiled faintly, offering reassurance. He knew that her courage, though fragile, had carried her this far. Now they needed to move carefully if they were to protect themselves and others. They followed the trail for several miles, Samuel leading the horse through narrow paths and over small streams. Every so often he would pause, dismounting to inspect tracks or signs in the dirt, broken branches, footprints in the soft soil, and the occasional glint of metal indicated that they were on the right path. Samuel spoke little, letting the woman rest while he studied the land. The quiet of the morning was broken only by the sound of birds and the horses' hooves on the rocky ground. Finally, Samuel spotted the first clear sign of the men, a small campfire smoldering near a grove of trees. Smoke curled lazily into the sky, carrying the scent of recent activity. He motioned for the woman to stay low and quiet, scanning the surrounding area. From his vantage point, he could see the outlines of a wagon and several men moving around, organizing their belongings. Samuel's heart pounded, but he kept his breathing steady. He knew that acting recklessly could put both of them in danger. "They're here," he whispered. "We need to be careful." The woman nodded, her face pale but alert. Samuel handed her a small satchel with water and supplies, instructing her to stay hidden if things went wrong. He dismounted quietly, moving along the edge of the trees, keeping the men in view while remaining out of sight. His experience as a tracker and a man who had lived alone in the wilderness gave him an advantage. He knew how to use the terrain, the shadows, and the trees to his benefit. Samuel observed the men for several minutes, noting their behavior. They were focused on their camp, unloading stolen goods, and preparing for travel. None of them seemed aware of anyone approaching. Samuel considered his options carefully. He could confront them directly, but the risk to the woman and himself was high. He could try to sneak past and alert the village, but that might allow the men to escape and continue their attacks. Finally, he devised a plan that balanced caution with action. He found a small path that led closer to the camp without being seen. Moving silently, he approached, using the trees and underbrush as cover. His heart raced, but his mind remained clear. He reminded himself that the goal was not to fight recklessly, but to stop the men and recover the stolen goods. He could feel the tension in his muscles, the adrenaline, sharpening his senses. Every step, every careful movement mattered. When he was close enough, Samuel called out in a calm, authoritative voice, "Stop right there." Samuel stepped into view, keeping his stance firm but non-threatening. "You need to leave this place and return what you took," he said. "No one else should be hurt today." For a moment the men stared at him, surprised by the sudden appearance of a lone cowboy in the wilderness. One of them sneered. "And who's going to make us?" he challenged, waving a sword carelessly. Samuel didn't respond with anger. Instead, he let his presence and his confidence speak. He knew the terrain, and he knew he had the advantage if things escalated. He moved slowly, keeping his hands visible but ready to act if necessary. "I'm giving you one chance," he said. "Leave peacefully, or you'll face the consequences of your actions." The men exchanged glances, unsure of how to respond. Samuel's calm, steady gaze made it clear he was not afraid. He had lived alone in the wilderness for years, surviving against both nature and human threats. This resolve was visible in every movement he made, and it made the men hesitate. Finally, one of the men muttered something and motioned for the others to mount their horses. Samuel watched carefully as they reluctantly began to gather their belongings. He stayed alert, aware that one sudden move could reignite the confrontation. He kept his eyes on the wagon and the stolen goods, making sure nothing was hidden or left behind. Once the men were on their horses and moving away, Samuel let out a slow breath. He had achieved his goal without violence, using caution, knowledge, and patience to prevent harm. He returned to the woman who had remained hidden but tense and offered her a reassuring smile. "It's done," he said. "They've left. You're safe now." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but this time they were tears of relief. She looked at Samuel, her gratitude clear. You saved me," she whispered. Samuel shook his head, keeping his voice gentle. "No, you saved yourself. You had the courage to escape, to survive. I just helped you along the way." They spent a few moments resting, the tension of the encounter slowly ebbing. Samuel checked the woman's injuries once more, making sure the bandages were still secure and that she was comfortable. She drank water and ate a little food, regaining some strength after the long, tense morning. As they prepared to leave the clearing, Samuel considered their next move. They needed to return the stolen goods, warn the village, and ensure that no one else would be hurt. He knew the men might return, so they had to act carefully. He also knew that the young woman's trust in him was fragile. He could not afford to make a wrong decision that might put her in danger or break that trust. They rode slowly along the trail, Samuel leading the horse and scanning the surroundings. The woman remained quiet, her eyes alert, but she seemed calmer now. The encounter had shown her that there were people willing to help, willing to stand up against cruelty. It gave her a sense of hope she had not felt since the attack on her village. Samuel's mind was busy with plans. He thought about the best way to approach the village, how to recover the stolen goods, and how to warn others without alerting the men. Every detail mattered. He had to ensure that the village would be safe before nightfall. He also needed to consider the woman's well-being, making sure she was not overexerted or placed in unnecessary danger. The trail led them through a series of hills and valleys, the landscape changing from dense forest to open plains. Samuel used the terrain to his advantage, moving cautiously and quietly. He pointed out small paths and hidden clearings, teaching the woman to observe the land and remain aware of their surroundings. She listened carefully, learning from his experience, and he could see her confidence growing. By late afternoon, they reached a vantage point overlooking the village. From this height, Samuel could see the smoke from chimneys, the movement of people in the fields, and the outline of the huts and homes. He felt a mix of relief and urgency. The village appeared intact, and the people seemed unaware of the morning's events, but that did not mean they were safe. He needed to return the stolen goods and warn the community before the men could cause further harm. Samuel guided the horse down the ridge carefully, making sure the young woman was steady and comfortable. They entered the village quietly, moving through the familiar paths and avoiding unnecessary attention. Samuel approached the village elder, explaining the situation and showing the recovered goods. The elder's face reflected a mixture of shock, gratitude, and concern. Samuel knew that the people would need time to process what had happened, and he offered his assistance in helping them secure their homes and protect themselves in the future. The young woman stayed close to Samuel, her trust in him evident. She had survived the morning's ordeal, and now she could see that there were people willing to act with courage and wisdom. Samuel's presence gave her strength, and she felt a sense of safety she had not experienced in days. By evening, the village was quiet, the immediate threat removed, and the stolen goods returned. Samuel helped the woman settle into a safe place with her family, making sure she was comfortable and cared for. He knew that the ordeal was not entirely over. The men could return, and there might be further challenges ahead, but for now, the immediate danger had passed, and the village was secure. As Samuel stood at the edge of the village, watching the sunset, the sky was painted with shades of orange and pink, reflecting the sense of calm that had returned, at least temporarily. He thought about the morning's events, the confrontation with the men, and the decisions he had made. He felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that he had acted with care, courage, and wisdom. The young woman approached him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said softly. I don't know what I would have done without you." Samuel smiled faintly, placing a hand on her shoulder gently. "You were brave," he said. "Never forget that. Courage can carry you further than you know." As night fell, Samuel prepared to leave the village, knowing that his path would continue and that there would always be challenges to face. But he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that he could make a difference, protect the innocent, and act with courage and wisdom. The day's events had tested him, but they had also reminded him of the power of careful action, the importance of trust, and the strength that comes from standing up for what is right. The sun rose slowly over the village, casting a warm golden light across the fields and homes. Birds sang in the trees, and the soft murmur of daily life returned to the once tense community. Samuel Hayes stood at the edge of the village, watching the people move about their chores, tending to animals and greeting one another. There was a sense of normalcy, yet underneath it, a quiet understanding lingered that the morning's events had changed them all. The young woman, who had been so terrified just days before, moved carefully among her family and neighbors. She smiled shyly at those who welcomed her back, her confidence returning little by little. The bandages on her arms were clean, and her hair had been combed and tied back. She walked with a quiet dignity, aware of the courage it had taken for her to survive and for Samuel to protect her. Samuel observed her from a distance, feeling a sense of pride and relief. She had survived the ordeal, and in doing so, had found her own strength. Samuel walked through the village slowly, his presence calm and reassuring. People glanced at him with curiosity and gratitude, though he offered little explanation. He had never been one to seek praise. His satisfaction came from knowing he had done what was right. As he passed the village elder, a man with weathered skin and wise eyes, Samuel gave a small nod. The elder nodded back, silently acknowledging Samuel's role in protecting the community. There was a mutual understanding between them. Sometimes actions spoke louder than words. The young woman approached Samuel, her steps tentative but determined. She stopped a few feet away and looked up at him. I wanted to thank you again," she said softly. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been there." Samuel smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes crinkling. "You were brave," he said. "You survived when others might not have. I just helped you find the way." I don't know how to repay you," she said quietly. Samuel shook his head gently. There's nothing to repay. Doing what's right is its own reward. Just promise me you will remember your courage and your strength. That's the most important thing. The village slowly returned to its routines, the air filled with the sounds of daily life. Samuel helped the young woman's family secure their homes and protect their belongings, offering advice and guidance based on his knowledge of the land and the ways of the frontier. He shared strategies for keeping watch, for moving safely through the trails, and for responding to threats without panic. The villagers listened carefully, their respect for Samuel growing with each word. They understood that his actions had not been impulsive. They had been deliberate, thoughtful, and courageous. As the day progressed, the young woman began to share her story with her family. She recounted the fear, the flight, and the courage it had taken to survive. Her voice was steady now, no longer trembling with terror, though the memories were still painful. Samuel listened from a distance, respecting her space while remaining vigilant. He knew that listening and allowing her to tell her own story was as important as any action he had taken. It was a way for her to reclaim her voice and her strength. The villagers gathered later in the afternoon for a meeting. Samuel stood beside the elder as they discussed ways to prevent future attacks and strengthen the community. Plans were made for watch schedules, safe paths through the surrounding hills, and signals to alert neighbors of danger. Samuel contributed quietly but effectively, sharing his knowledge without dominating the discussion. His presence was calm, steady, and reassuring, and the villagers felt more confident knowing that someone with experience was guiding them. The young woman stayed close to her family but often glanced at Samuel. She had come to see him as more than a protector. He was a symbol of hope, courage, and compassion. She understood that the frontier was a harsh and often cruel place, but she also realized that people like Samuel could make a difference. His actions had not only saved her life, but had restored a sense of safety and trust in a world that had seemed overwhelming. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, Samuel walked to the edge of the village once more. The events of the past day weighed heavily on him, yet there was a sense of peace. He had faced danger, protected the innocent, and acted with integrity. He had honored his own code of conduct, balancing caution with action, and he had witnessed the power of courage in others. The young woman approached him again, her eyes reflecting the colors of the sunset. "I will never forget what you did for me," she said softly. Samuel nodded. "And I will never forget the courage you showed. Remember it always. It will carry you further than any fear." For a moment they stood in silence, watching the sky. The wind rustled through the trees, carrying the sounds of the village and the distant hills. Samuel felt a quiet connection to this place, to the people he had helped, and to the young woman whose life had intersected with his in a way that would leave a lasting mark. He thought about the lessons of the past days, the importance of patience, the power of courage, and the value of careful, deliberate action. He had faced danger, witnessed fear, and acted with integrity, and in doing so, he had not only helped another person survive, but had also reclaimed a part of himself that had been lost with the death of his wife. There was a sense of renewal, a quiet understanding that even in a harsh world, actions guided by morality and courage could make a difference. Night fell, and the stars began to twinkle above the village. Samuel prepared to leave, knowing that his journey would continue and that there would always be challenges ahead, but he felt a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that his life, though lonely at times, had meaning beyond his own survival. He had found a cause worth fighting for, someone to protect, and a way to act with courage and wisdom. The young woman's family thanked him repeatedly, their gratitude heartfelt and genuine. Samuel accepted their thanks with quiet humility, knowing that true reward lay in seeing them safe and confident. He watched as the woman smiled faintly at him, her eyes reflecting relief, hope, and a newfound strength. She had survived, and she had learned that courage and trust could exist even in the harshest of circumstances. As he mounted his horse to leave, Samuel looked back at the village one last time. The lights in the homes glimmered softly, the silhouettes of people moving about created a sense of life and resilience, and the young woman stood with her family, safe and cared for. He felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet satisfaction that comes from knowing that one has done what is right. The trail ahead was long and uncertain, but Samuel rode forward with confidence. He had faced danger, acted with integrity, and protected those in need. He had seen courage in others and had guided it where it was most needed. The lessons of these days would remain with him, shaping his actions and his heart in the days to come. As the moon rose, casting a silver glow over the hills and forests, Samuel Hayes rode into the night. He knew that life on the frontier was never easy, that danger and hardship would always exist, but he also knew that courage, compassion, and careful action could make a real difference, and in that understanding he found peace, purpose, and a quiet hope for the future. The young woman, now safe with her family, would carry the memory of his actions with her forever. She had survived fear, faced danger, and discovered her own strength. And Samuel, the widower cowboy, had been reminded once again that even in a world full of challenges, one person could make a difference, and one act of courage could change a life.